You're now listening to the Something Good Podcast Network. Please press any key to continue.
A kiss, as defined by Dan Webster, is something pleasing, a caress, a gentle touch. But there's another kiss that isn't in Webster's.
Hey world, we're kids!
Some critics say they don't make music, they just make noise.
Yeah, Kiss sucks!
Kiss implies the extreme in the theatrics on stage, utilizing fire and smoke and bizarre costumes, and the ever-consistent, constant concealment of their true identities.
Speaking of which, Kiss is going to have its own comic book soon.
Take Kiss with you. It's fun. Show your friends and be the first. Now.
Oh my God, no time to turn!
Welcome once again to No Time to Turn, a Kiss Nerd podcast.
Nerd. And this will be a very nerd-centric episode.
Ooh, we're getting very nerdy.
As if the others have not been.
well,
there's a lot of minutia in this one, much like the
is.
tribute album episode.
As always, I'm with Cap and Alex from the Something Good Network.
Yo, yo.
What's up?
I'm Russ. I'm your host, I guess.
Yes.
I'm uncomfortable with that.
Host. What about host with the most?
I'm even more uncomfortable with that.
The ringleader.
The whatever.
The ringleader of the Psycho Circus.
Oh, God.
The hottest podcast host in the world.
Yeah.
Russ.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so anyway.
You wanted the best.
Well, you got Russ instead. Join the Russ Army. Our membership is only $5 a year.
What all do you get with that?
Yeah, really.
Thanks, y'all. You get an online shout out.
Yay.
I'll say your name at the end of the episode.
Somewhere there's a Kiss lawyer going, nope, can't do that.
Nope. Aw, shit.
We are, of course, moving through the history of Kiss album by album, year by year.
Cycle by cycle.
Yeah, in a very non-scientific and unorthodox way, just commenting on our opinions as to what was going on, when, where, how, and why. And then we're into the year 1995, and there's a lot of interesting stuff happening, as we've talked about on the previous episode. Larry Mazer, their business manager, I guess, or creative manager, I guess is really what he was. I'm still uncertain. Is Jesse Hilson still the manager here?
I think by this point, Kiss was kind of self-managing again without being direct.
Well, Larry Mazer quits over their self-tribute, which
still
rightly so.
Weird.
Yeah.
So I guess they're kind of self-managing here. But
and honestly, it feels like even though they've only kind of mentioned Tommy playing a role as like media guy, it really does feel like at this point that Thayer is kind of getting a little bit more in the forefront of operations.
Yeah.
Especially during this time period, it feels like Thayer has a lot more to do with orchestrating. He's kind of in the forefront of these conventions.
And you see interviews with Gene where he talks about getting Tommy out of Black and Blue, saying like how Tommy's kind of moved on from doing music, but still wants to be involved in the biz.
And the biggest quote they use from them about Tommy is they're like, Tommy's a team player. He's great. He does anything, we need him to do. He'll put together a book or wash our windows, and man, my windows are clean.
That's a shitty thing to say.
Yeah, that is paraphrasing, but they've
kind of like
they've used a quote and wrapped it up with he'll do anything from do this, that, and the other, and wash windows, and man, my windows look great.
Man, he's a great errand boy, right?
Hey, who got the last laugh though?
That true. He earned it in a lot of ways.
Alice Cooper used to have a guy he called Renfield, and I forget what the guy's name really was.
Was that like his little assistant or something like that?
It was a guy that he was a big, huge fan, and he had archived everything, and I guess they kind of gave him kind of a low-level job to manage that to some degree. But
and that's kind of what Tommy's doing at this point.
Well,
but as a fan,
Renfield sadly was found in a dumpster with a bullet in his head.
Oh, wow.
Self-inflicted.
Oof.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad story. But, that's the fate for a lot of nerds, and we are
Nerds.
We're nerds. Yeah. So let's
Tommy was
tribute
too.
to one of the fallen brothers.
And Tommy was probably a Kiss nerd too. I'm sure right now the last thing Tommy Thayer will ever want to do when he's done is hear another Kiss song.
Right.
Which, I mean, but
Although Gibson has just released a new app where you can like learn to play guitar by famous guitarists, and Tommy is teaching you how to play classic Kiss solos like Cold Gin and Detroit Rock City.
well, he was
Good for him.
he had to do that at another point.
A year later at this point.
we will discuss in another episode.
Which I found, and that's the reason I brought it up, because it felt kind of weird and poetic.
Yeah.
Right.
Meanwhile, there's a curious phenomenon that has been occurring probably since the late 80s up into this point, which is the rise of the Kiss fan convention.
Yes, a kind of an interesting concept, because at this point in time, Comic-Con was starting to pick up steam, because there was small comic conventions called Comic-Con that was happening in the late 60s, early 70s, only within New York, and it was basically like an old VW place would just get rented out, and there'd be like 4 or 5 comic creators in there, and like maybe 200 people throughout the day would show up, and that was Comic-Con.
Right.
And by this point, so comic conventions were becoming a lot more prevalent, but all of a sudden, Kiss gets conventions. How many other bands warranted a convention
I was
at this
about
point?
to
Like
ask
maybe
that.
the Beatles.
Or like Elvis with Graceland.
Elvis, the Beatles. Cons are very commonplace now, of all various types.
Any niche you can think of.
And I don't, I mean, my kids will pop up and go, we're going to such and such. I'm like, what's that? Oh, it's for this. And I'm like, huh?
Yeah. Heroes Con, Horror Cons,
There's
Fanboy
Pokemon,
Cons.
there's
Pokemon cons.
There's anime cons, there's anime specific cons. It's just
like specific shows or specific eras or
it's
creators.
And so, but back in this time, it wasn't common at all.
No.
And so that makes the Kiss fan convention more of an anomalous kind of occurrence. These would feature just like what you would expect. It's a kind of a marketplace for collectors to buy, sell, and trade their shit. Classic merch. It was very much centered on the classic makeup era of Kiss, more so than anything.
And all the toys and minutia that came with that product.
And the really fun part about it is members that were no longer part of Kiss were getting reached out to and actually showing up. Like the elusive Vinnie Vincent showed up to a few of the fan conventions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And because it was a little controversial because he put on the makeup.
Yeah.
So he shows up, does that, and then like Bill Aucoin was real famous for just showing up. He wouldn't be part of like a roster or anything. Bill would just show up, but he would also show up with a van and sell shit.
Yeah.
Well,
hey,
he had a warehouse.
So
yeah,
but that plays into something important that happens there. So Bill Aucoin is starting to kind of siphon off his classic Kiss stuff to the nerds that are in the know, that'll meet him at the hotel, and he'll have like the spread out and be like, I got some gold records.
See, when you say that, I think
like he's a drug dealer.
Yeah, I think. Have you ever seen the movie Taxi Driver, where the guy's selling him the guns in the hotel room? He's like, "That's a really good gun. That's a good gun. You'll like that gun."
But
I can see Bill going, "Yeah, that's a really good boot. That's the boot he wore." And
oh yeah, that's a good necklace.
And
of
course,
that's the necklace that Paul wore.
yeah.
But the thing is from all accounts, because I've heard like 3 or 4 different stories of like collectors that actually bought stuff off Bill. That's kind of the vibe it had, because Bill knew.
Well,
it was important.
Of course.
Is like he understood at that point. He made it very
I argue that
prestigious.
Bill always understood the importance of what they had done and why it was special, more so than anybody else.
Oh yes.
We could even do a little thought exercise here. Larry Mazer versus Bill Aucoin in terms of creative management. And what do you think Bill Aucoin would have done with a non-makeup Kiss?
Ooh. Good question.
Honestly,
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this,
but my first instinct would have been Bill would have never allowed it.
Yeah.
That's my immediate first instinct.
Of course.
But if we want to take that part off the table of just, okay, let's say they caught Bill on a good day, he got the right cut from his dealer, and he's like, yeah, fuck it, take the makeup off. I don't give a shit. If that happened, honestly, I feel like he would have tried to make them more commercial. If that makes sense. He's like, okay, well, if we're gonna take the makeup off, we need to really build you guys up as the dream team band.
Yeah.
I feel like he would have really leaned in he would have stylized them a little better. He would have had a better eye for the fashion. They would have still been flamboyant, but it wouldn't have been so...
It wouldn't have been Asylum.
No.
It would not have been Asylum. So I feel like just an overall better creative direction, maybe a more cohesive direction.
And I can see him hooking up with various guys like Bob Rock or some shit like that.
And to a point, we talk about these conventions, they had KISS tribute bands playing at them. To my knowledge, there's never been any tribute act dedicated to the non-makeup era using, say, the Asylum costumes.
Well, because what would have been the point? There was no nostalgia for that.
I know,
and
they're never really,
because they could still go see KISS live and hear "Tears Are Falling." Why would they want a tribute band of that?
But,
they want to see some guys, spitting up some $2, clown makeup blood.
Right. We talk about, you talk about there's a market for this KISS costume and merchandise and all this stuff, but
it plays into even the tribute album because there's so many people starting to embrace this old era.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a lot of what's the salvage, the saving grace for KISS to kind of chug through this grunge movement in the 90s, because a lot of the so-called grunge movement or whatever alternative movement that's rising all grew up through this, and they have nostalgia and appreciation for this.
And you've also got musicians like Marilyn Manson wearing face paint, and he may have picked that up from Alice Cooper and other people and stuff like that. But people think KISS to an extent when they see that too.
The theatricality and
a small thought thing too that it won't take nearly as long is were KISS ahead of the time by 2 years with the Rise to It video, or a couple years rather, with the Rise to It video, because it feels like they felt the nostalgia was going to come, or Larry felt the nostalgia was about to come, but they did it, and we already covered the fact that it really didn't pop. It didn't do much.
They were reluctant to do the Rise to It thing.
But now, fast forward 3 to 4 years, and there's this big groundswell of people really appreciating the makeup era. So did they just shoot that load a little too early?
I don't know. Well, I don't. We can discuss that as we get into the reunion. But
again, I just thought that was interesting.
This ties in. We talk about again. There's people, Bill, and perhaps other people that have got access to the old costumes and stuff. This stuff has been kind of warehoused and forgotten.
Yeah, because also during this time period, I forget if it was between, I remembered seeing it when we were doing the research, but then I didn't jot it down and it didn't really come up when we were doing the episode. But sometime between the Crazy Nights era and Revenge, sometime between that era, their old warehouse just stopped getting paid for.
Huh.
That's the
that
story.
Doesn't surprise me. We talked about they were strapped for cash.
They just quit paying on the warehouse, and it defaulted. So all of a sudden, a lot of this old memorabilia, costumes, guitars, small stage props, it got let go in an auction. And like any of those massive sale, okay, do you want to buy this storage locker sale? And,
you think that? So somebody probably bought it, not realizing what was inside it, and
just started shuffling it out.
Well,
and then collectors started collecting it up. And then a few years later, these fan conventions pop up, and you've always got the one or two people that set up the really nice big booth. And this was always the big pulling point for these fan conventions, is if a member wasn't showing up, they could usually get that baller one or two big collector that shows up, and he's like, look, I've got all of Ace's old guitars and some of his costume pieces. Right. And some other guy shows up like, look, I've got Gene's boot.
Yeah.
So it's like, where are they getting this from? That's where it was coming from, was these warehouses that were just getting defaulted on, and all of a sudden things started sprinkling out.
Now, is this when the internet's starting to become a thing and people are like reaching out to each other that way?
Yeah,
a little bit.
And the bootleg community is still very large.
It's more of a bootleg community.
Okay.
On July 17th, 1994, there's a KissCon in Detroit. And at this one, there was a most unusual occurrence. There's someone with a little KISS museum featuring original stuff, costumes, and stuff.
And it was one of the larger ones. Like, they had like 2 or 3 different eras.
Do you have the name of the guy who it was?
We'll just call him Bob Munson. That's his last name. There seems to be, when I was doing research on this, there seems to be a little bit of family things that kind of went sour with it. So it was the Munson family that was involved
Whoever
with it.
these guys are.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's neither here nor there. We're not throwing any.
Not at all. And that's why I was saying
aspersions
just basic info on that.
But at this convention, a very surprise appearance occurs when Gene and Paul show up. Mm-hmm. Only it wasn't the hobnob with the fans. It was to reclaim what they claimed was stolen costumes. They're flanked with federal agents and lawyers.
And this footage is on YouTube. The title of it is Kiss, Gene and Paul Raid Kiss Convention 94. And it's funny as hell. When you watch the video, when they start making their way in, you hear someone in the very back go, "Holy shit, that's Gene."
Well, this is confusing to me even now. I get if they felt like the stuff was stolen, and that's one issue. But to go to this convention yourself, that really positions you as the bad guy, because people are always going to look at this, as they're coming in and just arbitrarily taking shit from somebody else, and you don't know what the story is on that, and we don't know who's right, wrong, or whoever. Apparently they go to court with this and they win, so obviously the legal precedent was in their favor.
Yeah, you don't hear that in interviews about this time period.
They gloss over that
but
very
it
quickly.
Still looks really shitty on their part to do it.
And you know why it especially looks shitty? It's very out of character. Because I was talking with someone the other day. There's an artist I follow on Instagram called Butcher Billy, and he does really cool mashups of pop culture, different properties. So like he does a lot of David Bowie and Star Wars mashups because Starman and things like that.
Right.
So, and she was asking, she's like, what about copyrights? I was like, well, as long as they're modifying it and changing it up some, they really can't do much. I said, and bands get really touchy on it. I said, but Kiss, I said, they're actually really cool about it. They support tribute acts. They want tribute songs. So when you look at Kiss's character, they really don't put their thumb down too hard on the fans.
And you even hear...
So when something like this happens, it's very, not shocking, but it definitely puts a different tone in place because you just don't see that from them.
The question is, could this have been handled any differently or any better?
It could have been handled a lot better, I feel. Because Gene and Paul did not have to be there. It's the same reason why you have bodyguards. It's not because the artist can't defend themselves. It's not because they don't feel protected. But they are the bad guys if they keep walking past fans going, no, 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 stop, stop.
Oh, yeah.
If you've got the
Somebody
bodyguard...
Else going, no, stop. It's
it
like, their bodyguard was an asshole.
Exactly,
Right,
and it keeps the image. So,
fall guy.
so
But here
if someone,
they didn't.
so if they had just sent in their own team... along with police, because they had police escort, so
Right.
apparently they had permission to do it.
Yeah.
If they had just sent some muscle in their place and then showed up to address it, because they showed up to address the audience also. So if that had happened and then they show up and address the audience, that even would have felt a little different than seeing both Gene and Paul going in, literally ripping their own stuff off this table.
Yeah, it's a really shitty look for them here.
Especially when you hear Gene talk about it, when he says things like, this was something special when we saw these conventions pop up, that made us feel, special and yada, yada, yada. But then they go and do this.
And then, well, in the wake of this, they also do an interesting thing. They copyright the term Kiss Con or Kiss Convention.
Kiss Convention.
But it's not just Kiss Convention they copyright. They do like a half dozen permutations of the term Kiss Fan Fest, Kiss whatever.
But I think the only one they didn't grab was Expo, because you keep seeing Kiss Expo show up.
Maybe I don't know exactly. I saw, but there's you can find this stuff online. It's not a big deal to me, but I just think it's kind of a shitty play. It's like you don't get to sit there and, like they do they mentioned this in the Kiss My Ass home video, which we referenced in the last episode. You don't get to sit there and jerk off in public going, look at what we got, and then turn around and try to shut it all down. It doesn't make any sense unless you have something in mind.
And again, the only reason we even bring that up is because it does feel so out of character. Because Gene and Paul have always been so good to fans. And even Gene was kind of calling out Paul during this time period, or kind of the next time period when they start recording Carnival of Souls. on the Kissology video, there's the behind the scenes of them like making the record. And G's straight up calling Paul, he's just like, yeah, that the prick tour is when you were acting like a prick toward all the fans. Shit like that. So, they're very aware of how they treat their fan base. And it's just a very odd look.
I think it's one of those where it's like, oh, if anybody's going to make money off of a Kiss
it's going to be us.
It's going to be us.
Well, seeing the opportunity to exploit this to their own advantage, they decide to curate their own official convention. But before all of this happens, there's still stuff that they're taking care of, kind of loose ends. And this does feel very much like a very kind of mismanaged or self-managed kind of just shooting in the dark kind of maneuvers that they're doing here, because they don't tour at all in 1994.
No.
And instead they play a handful of one-off dates and then head off to do a short tour of South America in the late summer. And there's nothing particularly notable other than their set list is increased to as much as 22 songs.
Mm-hmm.
And
very classic era heavy.
It is very classic era. There's usually no more than 4 non-makeup era songs in the set.
Very self-aware now.
3 of these dates are part of a festival series called Monsters of Rock, and I'm unsure if they are in any way related to the European counterpart, but these are the bigger shows of the tour, that they draw over 25,000 people at these Monsters of Rock shows. They only draw about an average of 5,000 people on their own, which is a far cry from the 1982 San Remo shows or wherever it was.
And those Monsters of Rock shows are actually on YouTube.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of it the other day.
They also played, I don't know why I find this stuff funny, but I just do. They played the Arizona State Fair.
I agree, man. Anytime you see a big band playing something like a fair or an amusement park, it's a
little more common now.
I'll see Cheap Trick get on fair bills every now and then.
I saw Cheap Trick at a fair.
There you go. Hey, got to get that paycheck.
But it's still something about these bands playing the State Fair does seem a little cheap.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like
did it.
It's Cheap Trick does it. Graham Funk.
38 Special.
But you kind of sense that you have lessened yourself in stature when you do this. They're using, interestingly enough, kind of a recycled version of the Animalized stage. This is the stage they also will take with them. They do tours in the winter of 1995 in Japan and Australia. This is a return in Australia the first time in 15 years. Is it 94? I think it's winter. Are you sure it's not winter of 95?
Oh, I thought we were still just going chronological. We were still in 94 at that point.
I thought that the Japan and Australia is early 95.
It is.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah.
Let's see. Oh, it's interesting. That's tour that they do. Now they've increased to 6 non-makeup era songs, but the opening song is "King of the Nighttime World," which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I like those clips because it works really well because you get the hottest band in the world, Kiss.
Yeah. I always thought that was a great opening song. Mm-hmm. I love that song.
Well, because it works really cool. It's got good dynamics. It starts with, the drum roll with everyone playing the riff, and then it eventually just cuts down to one guitar and drums. And then everyone kicks back in for the chorus again. So it's just a really good dynamic song.
There's no attendance figures that I can find for these shows, but from what I could tell, they did pretty well, albeit in smaller venues. So I know I saw numbers like they played like certain places in Japan to like 2,000 people.
Right.
But that was the hall in Japan, and that's not super uncommon apparently over there. I guess the bigger areas are going to be like Tokyo.
Right.
And even if they played a smaller hall, they could probably play multiple nights.
Now, who's opening for them on these runs?
I do not have any information on that.
I'm seeing some notes in here, and they're saying like other acts, none.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a few of those.
There's some. I think there's a band in Australia. It was like some sort of local or Australian band that played the shows there. I'm not sure because the shows in Australia included 5 appearances at Kiss conventions.
Oh.
And this is why we're kind of moving this way. And these all proved to be quite successful, which of course paves the way for a U.S. convention tour.
Right.
I don't know. From what I understand and from what I gather, this was all worked in conjunction with Kiss. I don't know that it was necessarily their idea.
This wasn't the official Kiss convention,
but they were heavily involved with it,
Mm-hmm.
and they brought in Tommy and a guy named Tim Rosner to help orchestrate it and put it together. And I guess they flew in all their now, which they have possession of,
Their memorabilia,
full costumes, full everything.
I want to say Gene was pretty involved with it too. At least he'll tell you he was.
Yeah, this does honestly feel like the era that Gene started kind of mentally coming back more. It felt like Gene was a lot more involved.
I think Gene's always been more plugged into the original concept of Kiss as a theatrical act. That's what gets him off more so than just being a rock band.
Yeah.
Paul, I think, is the other way. I think Paul always dreamed he could be, Robert Plant. And we've talked about this. Kiss exists in its own self-contained context. Kiss isn't Led Zeppelin. It isn't even Aerosmith.
No.
And it can't even be rightfully compared to it. It's a whole different thing. But whatever. I won't get into that.
Well, I was going to ask, since they kind of see it more in that aspect in this time period, do you think they saw the writing on the wall as far as like what a reunion could do?
Absolutely, but I don't know that they're ready to go that far yet.
Right.
Well, I to lead into what Cap's saying, when we talk about the very first actual official convention, I think Cap's onto something. I think from that first show they knew something was up.
Well, absolutely, but I don't. They have to approach that. Obviously, they're thinking long term.
Right.
They know eventually it's going to happen. They have to.
Yeah.
It's an inevitability.
Because they've already been playing nice with Ace, getting on stage with him once or twice. Because there was that one show where Gene and Paul got up to sing
that was in '87. After that, things kind of got really sour between them.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if this is true, but I remember hearing about this with the Kiss My Ass tribute record, about there being a note to Ace and Peter saying, "Hey guys, we couldn't have done this without you," in so many words.
Well, that's but that's really kind of I think it also helps.
It's more of a handshake and a sham.
And
right.
Trying to make themselves look kind of cool to the fans too.
Yeah.
In May of 1985, Alex Coletti, who's the producer of MTV Unplugged, had a meeting with Tim Rosner, who was one of the coordinators for the convention tour and tour in Australia. I guess he was their tour manager. I don't know if he was their tour manager at this point. I know he would become tour manager. But I don't know that this was anything formal, but Rosner had worked that Australian tour and passed Coletti a tape of it, and Coletti in turn began greasing the wheels for an episode of Unplugged with Kiss. He's met with all kinds of resistance initially, but he's a Kiss fan apparently.
Big time.
So he's pushing. Now this is in May of '95, so when this stuff starts rolling, it's hard to figure out exactly what the timeline is on this. But Kiss is bringing this convention tour to the U.S. and the big payoff is a 2-hour acoustic performance.
From what I understood, so far everything you said is correct. Coletti got that early tape from the Australia stuff. I think Coletti was at the June 16th show in California.
We'll get to that. But go ahead. Say what you're going to say.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I think he was actually at that show, saw the performance, and discussed with them after doing the show, the TV show.
It's not then.
It's not?
But we'll get there.
Okay.
The convention features, just to be clear, it's like a traveling museum of costumes, instruments, memorabilia.
Vendors.
But of course, vendors.
They're like hotels and stuff like that.
A tribute act in full costume. They've got video screens displaying classic Kiss footage. All of this is, largely centered around the makeup era.
Yes. And then interesting little things that I noticed watching, because sometimes on YouTube you can only find just the Kiss performance, but then there's some 3-hour long videos you can find on YouTube of these conventions where people are actually filming the other things that were happening, and Bruce Kulick was having a guitar play along teaching segment.
Eric and Bruce would do guitar clinics.
Yeah, Eric was doing this mashup on drums with a bunch of guitar riffs, and it was. And the thing is say what you want about Eric in Kiss, he's actually an entertaining drummer to watch. Like he has the performance down.
Right.
His skill, that's neither here nor there. He's a fun drummer to watch. So that was actually pretty smart, putting him front and center, showing off as a drummer. It was entertaining.
Well, of course, like we said, this culminates with the end of the day. Kiss does a 2-hour acoustic set, often composed of requests. And I guess they do a Q&A session.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is before or after they play.
It's a little bit before, and they kind of take a couple questions in between. One of the big things, though, that they were doing with this is during certain songs, specifically Heaven's on Fire and I Love It Loud, they would get audience members to sing the songs.
Weird.
Now, what's y'all's opinion on that?
I mean,
well, here, let's. This will speak to it a little bit, because it should be noted that the tickets have been priced at a hefty, for the time, $100. That was considered a giant ticket price back then. But the rationale is it gave the event a sense of elite exclusivity while limiting the potential rush of fans that would totally overwhelm the event. That prevents it from being overwhelmed.
Right.
So it kind of acts as a safeguard as much as anything else. So it's kind of a smart move.
Yeah.
To keep it at a manageable.
Oh yeah,
at a manageable
especially because
level.
These days you see all these conventions that get not Kiss related even, but just different conventions that get overrun, and promoters were not ready for it.
No.
They avoided that.
You probably still got to pay hotel staff and all
And
that.
it helps,
absolutely.
Yeah, it helps offset the costs, and it sure is, I guess, a tidy profit. But to your answer, how do I feel about people getting on stage for $100?
I mean,
I'm like, you're goddamn right, you're going to get on stage.
So,
I mean,
this may just make me feel or sound elitist or whatever, but I don't know. To me, there's a line between the stage and the audience.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's okay to breach that every so often, but like, if you're just handing a microphone over to a guy to sing a whole song and the big band has now become your backing band, it feels like it cheapens the experience of a live show. It kind of turns it into,
that's that
we're
great,
the same as you.
Right, but
where in reality, you got to keep a little bit of the mystique of we're the same as you, but we're here for a reason.
Yeah, but I think the idea here is, especially in this era where, again, this grunge thing has kind of made it like, there is less of a delineation between the audience and the stage.
Yeah.
This allows them to kind of let that guard down a little bit. And again, in an environment, I can see it, it's not something, I don't want to see like, some drunken bozo jump on stage and be like,
yeah, not
man,
that's different. I think that's different than this.
And I know it's probably what didn't happen. And I've seen some of that stuff, like the little girl got up and sang "Let's Put the X in Sex," which was really bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ran across that show, but I didn't know exactly which show that was, because they always talk about it in any of these retrospective documentaries. They always bring up that girl and her brother that played "Do You Love Me?"
Yeah.
And it's like, I didn't know what show that was, and I just ran across it by chance just listening to these, and you hear Eric say, "Where's that kid? Where's that kid?" And so it was Eric's idea to bring the kid up to play the drums, and then you hear kind of like, the family talking and like people kind of talking off mic a little bit, and then you hear all of a sudden Paul's kicking, and I'm like, oh, this is, I didn't know I was watching this show. It's so,
I mean, it's like that line between cringy and cute. I mean, but an 8-year-old singing those lyrics is a little bizarre. But
it you know what,
whatever.
It kind of gave me.
They were listening to Howard Stern that morning.
Well, because you've got the mom and dad up there like singing and or like smiling and clapping along, like, look at my girl go. You know what it kind of gave me? It gave me those child beauty pageant vibes, where it's just like, this is a little weird.
Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. The tour starts. I guess there's a press conference on June 16th, and they do a short performance of that. But the tour itself, the first convention date was June 17th in Burbank, California. And in the build-up to the event, Peter Criss contacted Gene and asked if it was okay to attend, because he wanted to bring his daughter and kind of show her what he had been a part of and why it had been important, because she was probably, obviously she was too young to have known any of it.
Right.
And even with, in the aspect with Peter, of course we didn't get into, the Ace and Peter's trials and tribulations through the 80s, but like by this point Peter was kind of on the other side of it. You know, he was kind of in his retrospective phase. He had gotten some of his personal demons figured out, relationships sorted, and even this was actually him kind of rekindling things with his daughter again. So it was a very tender and kind of genuine moment from Peter where he's like, I really just kind of want to be part of things. So I thought that was really sweet.
Well, they in turn, the band not only said, yeah, come along, they invited him to join them for a couple of songs during their set.
Yeah.
However, it's not widely known, yet true, he quietly actually had met with them several days prior to the event to rehearse. And I think he still fucked it up, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It was fucking Peter. That was a big deal, you know.
I think that kind of
It was a good way to kick it off because that kind of a buzz would feed into all the other shows. You never knew who might show up. Of course, no one ever does, but
right.
Well, the thing is
I'm sure it didn't hurt.
That's the moment I say that at least Gene realized there is a market for the reunion. And you know why? Go rewatch that video. As soon as Peter starts that first verse of Hard Luck Woman, he says, if never I met you. At that point, Gene looks to the audience and you see him slowly grin. Yeah. And it's a different grin. It's not like him, you know, just playing to the audience. That's his, oh shit.
You see dollar signs in his eyes.
You literally see him calculating in his mind, being like, oh shit.
I knew it.
This really could be something.
Well, let's look at some of these other dates. 2 dates are canceled. July 1st in Houston and July 4th in New Orleans were both canceled with the provision that the tickets sold for either one of those dates would be honored in Dallas, which I think was on the 2nd or 3rd. You know what? I didn't even write that date down. But what that seems to say is the turnouts for these things are a little anemic on some of them, because I know the turnouts for some were as little as 300.
Yeah, some of them, but some of them are pretty hefty too.
Yeah, well,
probably certain markets.
Absolutely.
So, but I mean, that's still kind of I feel really kind of pissed off. I've shelled out $100 to go see them in New Orleans, and now I'm going to have to drive 4 or 5 hours out to Dallas to go see it.
Yeah.
Now, you know, obviously I'd still have gone, but, you know, but that says the Dallas show was weak on sales. In Houston, they just comboed basically 3 shows into one.
I mean, it's a big undertaking, though, because they're doing this all by themselves with Tommy, right?
They've assumed the risk, yeah.
But then, like on July 9th in Nashville, they had roughly 1,000 in attendance.
Yeah. And
so that's pretty decent.
On July 8th in Atlanta, they made an appearance on Good Morning America to help promote it, which was kind of a big deal that they were able to get that.
Yeah.
July 12th, they appear on the KSHE radio in St. Louis. The KSHE. KSHE radio. I think it's pronounced. I think they say KSHE.
KSHE.
We live on the eastern half of the Mississippi, so everything's W here.
Yes.
But out there, everything's K. Anyway, that's the same station that had sponsored the kissing contest as part of the promotion for the first album.
No way.
As well as what they called the Kite Festival in 1974, where the band performed to what may still be their largest audience ever.
How many?
They estimate there was 140,000 people at the event. There's footage of that. They're playing outdoors in daylight, and you can find that stuff. It's an interesting thing to see. But July 22nd is when Alex Coletti attends. I think that's the Detroit date for the official tour.
Yes.
And this has been a full year
July
now.
22nd.
Yeah, a full year after Kiss rated the unofficial one. But it's still,
this was also the same show with the X and Sex and Do You Love Me?
Okay. Well, it's unclear to me at this point if a deal had been made or if it is finalized at this gig for the MTV Unplugged. But July 22nd, it's awfully close to the August 9th taping. So if it hadn't been ironed out by now, I can't see that it wouldn't have been finished by this point. I mean, this is kind of a quick turnaround.
Oh, yeah.
But either way, it does seal the deal for the band to do Unplugged. July 30th, they do the Roseland Ballroom in New York City. Ace and Peter are invited to perform, but they're touring, oddly enough, together.
Bad Boys of Rock
tour. The Bad Boys of Rock tour. corny as fuck.
Yeah.
My mother Rebecca actually saw him on that tour.
Bad Boys of Rock, brought to you by Bud Light.
Conan O'Brien sends his co-host over to cover the event in comical fashion, which airs on August 4th with the band as a musical guest. I remember watching that when it aired.
Yeah, I sent that in. The group chat on our Facebook because I had not seen the clip because it was Andy Richter that was doing Richter, it. Yeah. I had not seen Andy's clip. I'd seen them performing on Conan, but I just not seen that part of the clip, and that's why I sent it in. Russ's immediate response: "I watched that the night it aired."
Yeah, thank you.
So actually, since you saw that night air, what was your thoughts on it? Because watching it today, I was kind of laughing. It was pretty funny, and knowing that Andy is a Kiss fan, of course he went into it, a bit earnest, but he still had no problem poking at fans that were like super dressed up because of course he still had to make it comical. What was your feelings on that? Because I know that Kiss was still a very personal thing for people around that era because they had to deal with a lot of bullshit being a fan. And now you're seeing Kiss playing into something that might be at least misconstrued as poking at them again. Did that get the feeling watching it?
A little bit. I didn't watch it when you sent it to me. I remember it well enough that it was cringy. There was the things I remember. He made a funny joke. He looks at like Paul's Asylum outfit and goes, "Oh, apparently there's an exhibit here for Doug Henning fans."
Yes,
it was the magician back in the day. And then there's a guy who talks about, "Oh, Paul, he's my guy." It's like they interviewed the nerdiest, cringiest fans.
I know, they picked the best moments.
And I understand it. They're playing it for comical effect. But that speaks a little bit to Kiss's bravery. They've never been afraid to take it on the chin. And, even back in the 70s.
Right. Well, I mean, taking it on the chin is one thing, but they're taking it on the chin of something that was not meant to be taken on the chin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but there's no such thing as bad press.
Yeah.
That's how they're seeing this. And they get to perform. They perform on the show.
Yeah.
So, they can probably feel like, okay, but we're still going to come out here and do a strong performance that it shows we have a sense of humor about ourselves, and it also shows that we're still stronger than the
most of the bands out there.
Than the jokes they're showing and ever. So that goes to August 9th.
Yes. Well, I was going to say August 5th through the 8th, they're having the rehearsal. Actually, no, all the way to the 9th, they're even having rehearsals that afternoon.
Is that at SIR?
Yes. Yeah. And the really cool thing about it is by this point, Tommy Thayer had kind of gotten moved to filmographer. And he and one of his buddies filmed the entire thing, and so much of it is on YouTube.
There's like a 5-hour video of this on YouTube.
Multiple days of it, and
I
man,
had negative interest in watching.
I tried. I gave it about 30 minutes just for out of curiosity. I was like, I can't do 5 hours of this.
See, I love it, and I didn't do the whole 5 hours, but I've watched different pieces of it in long successions throughout the years. My favorite thing is they're testing out a whole bunch of guitars on day one to kind of figure out the right tone and sound, which makes sense. They're going to be doing a TV performance. They don't play with acoustics a lot. They've had years to figure out their live stage sound. They need to figure out the right guitars for this. So Gene's cycling through 6 or 7 different basses. Paul has about maybe 10 or 15 guitars to pick from. Bruce has about 10. And Paul's finally found the guitar he likes, and he's just walking around kind of getting used to it, warming up some. And he notices the camera and starts talking in a Barney voice and just starts going, "If you want to entertain the troops, you got to make sure and cater to the kids. They're going to be the future, like this." It just starts going, "Hi there, baby Bob. Let's sing a song." Seeing Paul doing a Barney voice, because he's got a kid at this point, so he's already in dad mode. Seeing Paul in early dad mode is honestly really funny. I like that a lot.
Meanwhile, Gene's making fun of dead celebrities.
Yes. Gene's making all the jokes that, to quote him, can't say that these days. Yeah. So it's honestly a really interesting look into the process. And I know y'all have zero interest in it, but I guess me also being like budding filmographer and like liking the process of things, I liked just kind of being the fly on the wall, seeing
it is cool
seeing
that's
the
out
way
there,
everyone interacts with each other,
Right.
who talks to who hangs out in what areas, and you kind of start getting a feel of Gene's camp and the people that hang around Paul, who talks to Eric, who talks to Bruce.
Well,
it's very interesting.
Well, they obviously they're preparing for this thing, and they're going to rehearse with Peter and Ace.
Now, I've read up on how difficult Ace was already being.
It wasn't Ace.
Right, because I was
was
hearing this from Paul and Gene on this stuff.
Well, even Paul and Gene admit that Ace wasn't really being a problem. It was Ace and Peter were both being represented by the same lawyer.
No, it wasn't a lawyer. It was a guy named George Sewitt. George
manager.
Sewitt had been their tour manager, was Kiss's tour manager in 1979 and 1980. And he went on to become manager at some point for both Peter and Ace.
Yeah. And apparently George.
And George seems to think that he holds all the cards here because
Right.
none of this can happen without their participation. He's kind of right to a degree, but I don't think he realizes there is a point where Gene and Paul are going to be like, yeah, it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
You know, and then they're going to walk away with nothing.
And that happened for like 3 hours on the 0 hour.
Oh, okay.
For literally for a minute, they went,
was
never
that
mind.
at this point?
Not at this point. At this point, everyone's playing along. There was a moment after practices and everything.
I'm saying at this point, is it during the unplug cycle that this happens?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, during the unplug cycle. So they have already gotten together with Ace and Peter at SIR. Tommy's kind of, gotten everything together along with Coletti. And then they arrive at the studio that they're going to be filming the special. And they get a phone call saying that Ace and Peter are no longer going to be part of it.
See, I didn't catch this. I didn't.
Yeah, that Ace and Peter were no longer going to be doing it. And Coletti talks about this. He does a little bit of a forward before the Kissology video.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm kind of pulling that story from, where it's like he had put... He kind of lays it out. He goes, I put a lot of time and effort into making the stage look cool. Gene and Paul were very receptive to my ideas. They really treated me like an equal. I had a great experience. And, we're doing sound check at the studio, and I'm playing Ace's guitar, and we're running through 2000 Man. And he's like, I'm glad I've got the video, because something that should have been so huge and monumental for me, I'm sound checking with Kiss. But all I can think about is... I'm out of a job tomorrow.
Well, that was part of the selling point, I think, for MTV, was that to do the Unplugged.
So for that
Ace and Peter had to be a part of it.
Yeah. So they had negotiations had completely, backfired.
Technical malfunction.
They tried to jump and kill Russ.
Yeah. But for a minute on that 0 hour, he genuinely thought that they were not going to be part of it. And he was like, oh shit, after this, my job's done.
Yeah, well,
but
that
then,
probably wasn't untrue.
Right. It wasn't. So it's like, it is just really fascinating, though, that even on the day, they did not know if it was going to happen.
And it's interesting to note that, because the fact that for this to have even become a deal, Ace and Peter had to be involved, just goes to show how titanic that was, even in the perception of MTV, who were never kind to Kiss.
No.
Therefore, to a layman's perspective, a mainstream public perspective, and no one gives a shit about Kiss Unplugged without Ace and Peter.
Well,
and that's
for a while, MTV didn't even give a shit about Kiss Unplugged, period.
Right.
They were just like, what do you mean this band doing an Unplugged?
Well, like you said, it was a fan that was
But they saw the
out.
potential of that, and they saw that as of the ratings potential. That's what they're looking at, the bottom line. Is this going to draw ratings? Is this going to benefit us for ad revenue? That's all any television is. It doesn't matter what you're watching. The nightly news is all steered towards ad revenue.
And not to jump too far ahead, but I think they were correct, because isn't the Kiss Unplugged either the best or second best selling Unplugged series? Like, it was neck and neck with Nirvana.
I've
heard second.
Yeah.
So
so they were right. It hit really big, because they did a lot of those Unplugged sessions during that time. Basically, any major grunge artist was doing one.
I mean, it was everybody from Nirvana to Neil Young, too.
Yeah.
Well, they were less frequent at this point than they had been. But so obviously they figured out whatever they had to figure out. I mean, it kind
that
of makes
part
it
always
seem
gets
like
very
to me,
blurry.
it just seems like to me that's just George Stewart running a bullshit play.
Well, then I hear stories of how Gene himself, like he says this in his book about how he was on the phone with George a lot, trying to get Ace and keep Ace on board or ready to pull the plug on Ace at any moment too with their conversations.
Well, I mean,
that leads more into the reunion.
Oh, okay.
That's a lot more into the reunion. During this point, it was just a money thing, and don't know if they're going to do it because of scheduling, quote unquote. It was a whole big mess. The getting ready to even just be like, screw this, was after these shows and getting ready for the reunion.
Okay.
Well, let's talk about the show itself.
Yes.
Obviously, they work out whatever kinks, and it pulls off. And I think all of these songs are done exceptionally well.
I agree. I think this is...
Especially considering that this material doesn't necessarily lend itself to acoustic renditions. You can see there's a little awkwardness to it to a degree, but and this really speaks highly, I think, of Bruce's ability as a musician. Rock and roll lead guitar is meant to be played through an overdriven amp on an electric string, right? And so you've got to figure out a way around that. It doesn't really work. It's not like classical.
They didn't really cheat either. They really stuck with pretty much full acoustic.
And Bruce is playing all the Ace leads, not verbatim, but pretty well, pretty faithfully.
Well, that would be my only problem with this whole thing. Has less to do with Kiss than it does the unplugged format.
Yeah.
Format.
Which, by the way, the floor mat, huge, blown
the stage
up.
is painted like Rock and Roll Over. I mean, that's this. I mean, everything is centered around makeup era Kiss here.
They've got the figures up with the Love Gun costumes.
In the final set list, there's only 2 non-makeup era songs played out of 15.
I have a really nerdy fact.
I know that they played other stuff.
Not even that. Have you noticed that they picked 2 songs from every album? Only 2.
I haven't thought of this.
They don't do more than 2 songs from every non-makeup album.
Now, is this including the outtakes?
No, I'm talking about the MTV Unplugged released record.
Okay.
So you've got like Coming Home. What's the other Hotter Than Hell song they picked?
Going Blind.
There you go. They only picked 2 from every single record. They never exceeded more than 2 songs per record.
But do they play 2 off of every record?
No. Well, you got Do You Love Me and Beth.
Yeah.
You've got Plaster Caster and 2000. No, not 2000, man.
Plaster and From Love Gun.
That's it.
That would be the single. But I found it interesting because you see a lot of the live shows are like Destroyer heavy.
Wait, they don't do Hard Luck Woman like even on an outtake, like on YouTube?
It's an outtake.
Okay.
Yes. I'm just going by the MTV Unplugged record.
Well,
we got into the minutia there.
Yeah, I know. But and the interesting thing about the set list they pick here, they kind of orchestrate it and make it sound like, we just kind of picked the coolest songs, and made this set. Even at the early convention tours, almost every set opened with Coming Home.
Well, I think that's one thing they really had to their benefit going into this thing was they had already been playing the whole previous month or 2 months really.
Yeah.
And doing this acoustic set every night or an acoustic set every night. So they knew which ones were dialed in and which ones they could do really well. It provides them a very solid base to build off of. And so this is a home run.
Oh, yeah.
And it's perhaps the only home run of the entire non-makeup era. I mean, where you can absolutely say they knocked this one out of the park. Even as a non-fan, you can watch it and go, well, damn, that's actually pretty goddamn good.
And Eric served the songs. I don't think Eric overplayed.
Well, and Bruce did too.
Mm-hmm. This is the only non-makeup era Kiss concert I've watched over and over and over again.
This is the only one. Yeah, this is the only one I've ever. I had a good time listening to this for the first time in forever.
Well, I think the easiest thing to probably go about would be, since we really feel like this is a solid record and we discussed off mic, there's really no need to go track by track. First off, what would be your least favorite rendition?
My least favorite?
Since it's a pretty solid record all
Okay.
around, we've got a lot of positives.
My least favorite would just be because of the source material would be Domino.
Right.
Yeah.
But I feel like,
And I think
okay.
that's like that's the slimiest point, and I guess that's why Gene he does the bitch bend over. I forget my name, which is a dumb fucking line. And at the end he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Like,
yeah.
no, you're not. It's we're sorry. We're sorry you had to play that goddamn song because we would have rather heard some other.
Okay, so
classic song
you know
in its
why he
place.
actually said I'm sorry.
Oh.
Okay, so
I just assumed it was because I know they did multiple takes of all of this. Now, that's
okay,
not
so
widely
there's
known.
3 versions of MTV Unplugged out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's the official original version. They did a VHS tape along with the CD.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a second version that's on the Kissology series they did. That included a couple more songs.
Mm-hmm.
There's a full unedited version. I don't know if it's on YouTube anymore, but at one point it was, and I have the audio bootleg. The reason Gene says I'm sorry at the end of that, they had to play that song 5 times.
Yeah, Gene kept messing up.
Yes, he kept messing up, or like he couldn't hear things and he'd stop like midway through. So they kept one mess up.
Well, that's
in
weird
the
that they
Kissology
would have
version.
they would have that they even would have aired it. Then it would.
I think it plays into it because at one point they get halfway through the set and start over.
Yeah.
Like they get a couple songs in, and you even hear Paul say, "You know what? That's so good. Let's try that all again. We'll be right back."
Well,
and then they walk back out on stage and start over with "Coming Home."
Right.
So it's like they did a lot.
I think they intend. I think that was probably formatted that way to a certain degree. Like, let's get multiple takes and we'll puzzle together a show out of it. I assume that was probably true of every episode that was ever taped of that show with every
all we
band.
really know is the Kiss minutia.
But the only one we know is the Kiss one.
Also, another interesting note, and props to them, even though they recorded a lot of takes, the official Unplugged release has very little overdubs. It's genuine performance.
Yeah, well, but again, that's because they were able to get
so many takes.
My
least favorite was actually "Do You Love Me?"
I was gonna say that's probably mine too.
To me, so I contrast your Domino saying it works better as an acoustic song.
Well,
"Do You Love Me" does not work better as an acoustic song.
Although the guitar part in the center, in the middle of it, kind of works though.
That's very nice.
And
that's very nice.
And that was something I noticed on Going Blind because, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I'm just hearing it wrong. On the electric version, he's picking out notes on the chorus, on the chords throughout the song.
Yes.
It's like, it's not just strummed, whereas here they're just strumming all 6 strings, which I thought that was a little unusual that they wouldn't use. I mean, it lends itself to that original dynamic. It would even be more pronounced on a clean acoustic. Whereas they do that in "Do You Love Me?" And they added, when they got to the reunion, they added this coda to "Do You Love Me?"
Yes.
That I think, from what I understand, was actually recorded for the album, but I've never ever heard it.
I've heard that rumor too, and I was kind of
never heard it.
There was a little bit of a swell of people kind of going, "Is that going to be part of that Destroyer Resurrected?"
Yeah, it wasn't
and it
there.
never showed up.
So I've never heard it, but and I would think that would have lent itself to that acoustic version as well. And
You're right. You're right.
Yeah, those are all little things you can nitpick, but I think all of this is still
overall it's still a fantastic,
really stellar. I think they chose a pretty good set list. I was cool to see them do stuff like "Sure Know Something."
I love that as an acoustic song.
I think that "World Without Heroes," it was cool to see them actually embrace the elder in a way
and do it earnestly
and do it good. Gene doing "See You Tonight" from his solo album, that just
it's a treat getting to see Paul play the song.
But it also shows their Beatle influence, which is so heavy and undeniable, and yet
it works
so much
great as an acoustic
overlooked
song.
On their whole thing.
And it's interesting that they did a Gene Simmons solo song, but they didn't do a Paul solo song.
Yeah,
because imagine like a "Wouldn't You Like to Know Me?"
Yeah, you could have done quite a few Paul songs.
So.
Especially because like something we hadn't mentioned, best Paul vocal performance since the 70s. I think this is Paul
On
at his
record?
at least on record.
Yeah, he's obviously very into himself.
But the thing is, it works though. I think this is some of his strongest vocals we've heard in years.
He gets a showcase on "I Still Love You."
I was gonna say at the very end he does the
and we can be
flex.
jaded, but let's take a step back. That's goddamn impressive.
Oh, yeah.
That he holds that note that strong. Because someone can hold a note for a long time, but it can be like
and it comes out of nowhere in a way, because it's kind of like he builds up to that point and then it's just like boom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even his, I still even that little thing he does at the end.
But he doesn't do it too long.
And it's all on key. Yeah. And it works. Yeah. So
and the harmonies all through the whole thing. The harmonies are on. They've got it. They're locked in. And like you said, it wasn't really overdubbed. They didn't have time or room to do that. So the only thing else that you could say, again, this is part of the MTV format. It's clear that Gene is playing through some sort of overdriven amplifier. His bass is overdriven.
Well, that's what it sounded like during the convention tour.
It sounds fucking killer, to be fair.
I mean, it's Gene Simmons.
It's really good.
Especially on Sure Knows Something.
Definitely not acoustic.
That's what fattens up the whole acoustic show dynamic, too.
Well, I mean, and Bruce is kind of cheating a little bit with that style acoustic he had. Because it kind of breaks a little bit more
on the acoustic to get more bend out of it. I mean, all that's fair. For what it is, it's still really, really good. And then you get...
They got some members of the family here today. They ain't talking about mom and dad.
Yep.
They talking about Peter, Chris, and Ace Frehley.
And out come lumbering Ace and Peter. It's almost anticlimactic in a weird way.
They're just like, hey, guys.
They just sort of come out and it's like, hey.
One of the best things, though, and... this is on the completely unedited version. It's not on the Kissology version. They all get out on stage. Ace is sitting there getting comfortable. The crowd, Ace, 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 Ace. He's laughing, and Paul, Ace Frehley. So they're all getting ready to start in 2000 Man. Ace leans into the microphone and goes, "What do you call a lesbian in Alaska?"
Oh my God.
A Klondike.
Get him off, get him off, get him off, get him off.
Welcome back, Ace.
That's not going to make air.
Roll a commercial.
It's just like, welcome back, Ace.
Yeah, great. Thanks for offending half the world there.
Gene's just in the back going,
No, Gene's laughing at that one.
Oh, boy.
But they make mention of that in the books. They're like, and Ace took no time at all to get into the microphone and make it about him.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this whole thing was really set up for him and Peter. I mean, let's just face it. At the end of the day, all of this was so they would get out and do their 2 songs.
And what do you think of those?
I think they're great.
They're solid.
I'm surprised. I was listening to it again last night. I'm surprised that Ace's lead was as strong as it was. Being that
Beth, too.
Yeah, especially on Beth. That arrangement of Beth was really excellent.
It's better than what they would have done.
Which would have been...
So when they were doing the rehearsals for Beth, Peter brings in this wooden box.
Yeah, that box. What do they call that thing? It's...
Oh, one of those cajones?
Yes. He brings that in because apparently it was a gift that Gene gave him a few years prior, which also kind of... That gets mentioned a few times, but let's stop and think about that a second. Gene gave Peter a gift a few years prior, even before all this happened. So as much as they want to talk about liking each other, at least Gene is making a point to reach out.
Gene has always had a soft spot in his heart for Peter. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, this extends all the way, I think, even to today. Paul has very plainly expressed he does not like Peter.
Yeah.
He's cordial to him, but he doesn't, he's said flat out, I just don't like the guy.
Yeah.
I can get it. Whereas I think everything that Paul hates about Peter, I think Gene has always found endearing about Peter. Even the whininess, the complaining, everything else. I think, it's almost like Peter's older, and Peter's always said the dynamic is that Gene's always been the older brother, even though Peter himself is older. And I think they were probably the closest of, even more closer probably than Ace and Peter. A lot of people don't probably see that, but
Ace looking and Peter at it from outside,
right? But but as
That
far
was
as an
about it.
interpersonal relationship as friends, I think Gene was closest to Peter out of all of them.
And I think they even make
Paul.
mention of that in like the Second Coming tape or something when it's like showing some of the backstage stuff, because Peter and Gene are sharing backstage space while Ace and Paul share backstage space. And I think they even make mention of that where like Ace and Paul got along because Ace would be quiet and Paul liked the quiet, but like Peter and Gene would gab like as if they were like women getting their hair done.
I think they had similar sense of humor and what have you. But
especially when it came to taste of music, because Gene had a large appreciation for that older music, and Peter was such a jazz head that they could talk about that all day long.
Yeah. So he does Beth, and it's, I guess they did like 3 takes of that.
2, yeah.
2. So that wasn't, and it was, they were doing multiple takes of everything.
And they went with the second take.
And then they bring back Bruce and Eric. Now, it would seem that, to offset the idea that there could possibly be a reunion, that they would have left Bruce and Eric on stage through the whole thing. It would make sense in a lot of ways, but I would assume, and I can only assume, that again was part of the contractual obligation. It was that there has to be at least 2 songs with just those 4.
Well, I mean, if you think about it from not even from a marketing sense, but think about it like a movie or, stuff like that.
I'm not saying I disagree.
It's such an epic ending where it's like, oh shit, everyone's coming out now? Oh man, this is cool.
Yeah, but that isn't what happens. When he says everyone's coming out now, it's...
Well, okay. I know what you're going to bring up. I have listened to that part over and over. So what happens, Paul goes, we're bringing everyone out. And the crowd cheers for a second, and then you hear what sounds like boos. You hear ooh, ooh, and you even hear Ace get on the microphone and go, "Hey, these guys are part of the family
this
too."
Is all edited out.
It's all edited out.
Yeah.
I honestly believe.
You think they're chanting Bruce?
I've heard it live before, and it does sound like boos when they're saying Bruce, Bruce. It kind of sounds like it.
Maybe.
So I'm on the fence if they were genuinely booing or if they were yelling Bruce like they did Ace.
Bruce felt like they were booing. He still feels.
Oh, he does.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a rough moment because like the fans have their moment of like the original guys.
And I can see being confused.
And that's why I said I'm not speaking definitively, but like to my ears, I'm still on the fence.
But you're saying?
I was just saying like since they put Bruce and Eric off stage. And the fans finally have this moment of like their band together on stage playing these songs.
Right.
The band. And then Bruce and Eric come out and all the fans are like, no, we got our band back. We got my band back.
That's exactly it. It felt like that watching it.
Yeah.
I can remember watching it going, I want more of that.
Yes.
Although I do have to say, man,
can we get 4 songs at least?
Yeah.
It was really cool seeing everyone playing Nothing to Lose and Rock and Roll All Night. And when you're listening to the audio, sometimes it's kind of hard to separate out who's playing what parts on the drums. But when you're listening to the convention tapes, Eric actually always stopped during the doo-doo-doo-doo-doo before the baby please don't refuse, that little guitar riff where Peter usually does the little tom rolls.
Yeah, he did.
Eric always stopped during the convention tours. So hearing Peter playing like his classic little fills and everything else. And then, interesting dynamic, Eric sings the song and not Gene. So you've got the 2 drummers singing the song. So that's even kind of cool.
I had not ever really thought of that until I listened to it again this in preparation for this. And I was like, well, here you've got the impossible, the drummer that was and the drummer that is and then the drummer that shall... But
Singer has a cool voice.
Oh, yeah,
I think he's saying that.
Well.
Absolutely he does. Absolutely. Like I said, this is a home run all the way around. And
Rock and Roll All Night having Ace and Peter singing a line.
That was different. Mm-hmm. I felt that was a little unnecessary, but it was
It would have been cool if they were able to sneak in Paul singing a line. That way it was all four originals.
It would have been cool as if they didn't play those 2 songs straight away and had Ace and Peter do at least 2 more songs. That's what
okay,
but
fan theories. What would have been the 2 more songs that would have been cool for that lineup to play?
You know, Ace had came in thinking that he was going to do Shock Me, and they weren't able to.
Yeah, Ace admits he said the solo just was too hard to play on acoustic.
So it's hard to say. I mean, what? That's a good question. What could they have done? Could they have done something? Could they have done New York Groove?
Okay, well, they could have kept Hard Luck Woman in the set and had Peter sing it instead of Paul singing it as the outtake.
Yeah, so there you go. You had 2 more. You know, New York Groove would seem logic because that was the.
They tried that on the convention tour and it didn't sound okay. Well, Paul just kind of tried singing along to it.
I could see Mainline being an acoustic song.
Ooh, that would have been an interesting deep cut too.
Yeah, possibly.
And then you were given another Peter chance.
But, you know, they also had a very limited window of time to do this.
Especially when you're doing every song 3 and 4 times.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying even in the rehearsal lead up.
Right.
So, but it would have been still kind of cool if they had been able to do at least 2 more extra songs. But
in
light of what was going to happen, I guess this is a really moot complaint.
And in my opinion, at this point, this version of Rock and Roll All Night's the only one I can actually sit and listen to. Like if I hear that drum intro for like a live version or the studio version, it's an easy skip. This one though, I'll still kind of sit and listen to because little moments that I like in it, you really hear Gene's bass.
Yeah.
And so it's like you really kind of follow along that thumpy bass line. The guitars kind of take back seat. So it's almost like a drum and bass groovy version of the song. And I really enjoy that. And honestly, the other song I think benefits the greatest from all of this, and y'all touched on it earlier, is Going Blind.
Mm-hmm.
I think this version of Going Blind is better than the Hotter Than Hell version.
I agree with that.
I think this is the definitive version.
I've always loved the acoustic version.
Gene's vocal is great. The way the solo flows, and even the way they kind of, even though they play steady when they could have plucked the notes.
It's really, really good, but
it's so solid.
It's hard for me to It's just part of what I love so much about Going Blind is that lead solo on it.
He still plays it, you know,
but you can't do it on acoustic. I mean, even if Ace had played the song on acoustic, it wouldn't have been the same as the record. That was an early favorite of mine, so it's just hard. But I see what you're saying,
right?
And I'm like I said in the last episode, I believe.
The tribute episode.
The tribute album where I said, you know, it's a great song anyway.
Yeah.
It just stands so well. It's one of their better songs. It's overlooked in their canon of music. But
and my last little note I have for this record before we move away from it is more or less a question, which is, what was Kiss's biggest hit in the 80s?
In the 80s?
Mm-hmm. Late 80s.
Forever.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. Not there.
They played Every Time I Look at You, so you can't use the excuse, where they weren't playing non-makeup songs. They wanted to focus on makeup era. Well, they played Domino. They play Every Time I Look at You. Why didn't they play their biggest hit? That seemed very odd. And it's a song that lent itself perfect to acoustic, and it's minus the era. It's still the Bruce era.
And it had been a successful video on MTV.
So that's kind of a little bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah, that is kind of, you know, I never considered that ever. But then again, I never ever consider that song. But that's that's just me. On December 15th, the band appears on KLOS radio in LA, performing acoustic versions of Calling Dr. Love and Hard Luck Woman. This ultimately proves to be the final performance with Bruce Kulick and to an extent Eric Singer.
Right.
And this is the end of the non-makeup era.
Yeah. I was kidding.
You actually missed it. They also do an a cappella version of White Christmas.
Well, I knew that. Yeah, I didn't count that. But as far as them playing, and I just think it's interesting to note that the end of the makeup era, they're playing, or the end of the non-makeup era, they're playing makeup era songs.
Yeah.
You have to question. There's some interesting stuff going on because they are back in the studio working on a new album.
Yes, they are. Like, because this kind of overlaps. They're doing the MTV Unplugged thing while they're working on this new album.
No, the album, they didn't. The MTV Unplugged was August 9th. They entered the studio in November.
Well, when I say working on, meaning writing material,
yeah.
Sending demos to each other, fleshing things out.
Yeah. And so one last little thing about this album, there was a bit of a snag when Mercury kind of prematurely claimed rights to the recording of it, which forced a quickie negotiation with MTV. I don't know if MTV had a deal in place to release the Unplugged on their own imprint or with another label.
Probably, because that's what they were doing with all the others.
So they had to work out a deal with Mercury, and the album was released on March 12th, 1996. And it debuts, I guess it debuts and peaks at number 15 before it just sort of, like everything else, disappears.
But then they released video of this at the same time.
And the whole video was very successful.
And what's weird, man, is like, I do have vague memories of being like 4, 5, 6 years old. I want to say I remember the week that Mom bought this CD. Like, I don't think she got it on release date, of course. I think she got it a little bit after the fact. But it's like, I feel like I remember when this CD entered the collection. And it's like, that's probably maybe my earliest Kiss memory without realizing it was Kiss.
Yeah.
Is oddly enough. So I think this was actually my first full experience with something brand new from Kiss.
Well, this seems like a big success for this lineup. And now they're going to go into the studio to record a new album. Yet we've also reached a very important fork in the road.
Right.
And we'll discuss all that on the next episode of No Time to Turn as we start looking at the mid-90s and what is and what was never to be.
This next episode is going to get real nerdy and real minutiae.
Well,
because contracts and negotiations and so many 0-hour plans change things.
But there's still another album.
Well, that's what I was saying, but 0-hour plans change those things.
Yes, plans are made, plans will go awry.
Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah. Awry for some people.
But we'll talk about that on the next episode of No Time to Turn, and hopefully we will see you all again then.
Thank you for listening. Please insert another coin by supporting the show for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/somethinggoodnetwork.